Y equals mx plus b. Y intercepts, x intercepts, slope of a line. I have a friend who works in construction, also does some carpeting, and he talks about how that's always in his tool belt as something that he uses in a lot of the work that he does, especially working with people who do architect as well. And for him, that's a daily tool. But for the vast majority of us, that might just remind us of sitting in algebra class, struggling to learn or even understand what that concept meant. And so while he might use it in his day-to-day, and there's some people that do, for a lot of jobs, you don't. And you probably haven't even thought about it since you were in high school, or if you have a child that might be at that point right now. Other than that, what was it for? I think this is the first concept and discussion that we have to have when we're talking about American education. So for me, just as a quick background, for those that have listened or those that might not know, I'm deeply into education now. My journey was a roundabout long one. I wasn't always into education, but that is where I'm getting my, that's where I'm getting my graduate work in my graduate degree, and hopefully going into my terminal degree. So it's something that I'm deeply invested in now, but it wasn't always that way. And maybe one day I'll talk about that. But these are conversations, these are topics that I deal with on a daily basis and have been for the last 7 years or so now, since I graduated from college. And so when we're talking about what we learn, and going back to the example of y equals mx plus b, a lot of people, a lot of students, current students, a lot of adults that were students, when we talk about American education, there's this idea that we aren't learning things that directly apply to our daily life. And because we can't directly apply it, there's not a lot of buy-in, there's not a lot of engagement. For different students, different subjects are going to be interesting. But for the overall part, why do we learn this? That's became a popular question as I became older in high school, even, at that time. And I'm sure it's still going on today. When I worked in high schools, a lot of students are just like, why do I need to know this? Why do I need to learn this? And so when we're talking about what education could become, what it needs to become, what it is, a lot of people will start there. They say the content that we're learning in class that students have to learn is not valuable. It's not something that you need to use in your everyday life. Now, I think there's some truth to that. There's definitely some discussions about what type of content needs to be learned and what we should be learning in school, and overall what we should be taking from school. But there's also a conversation about how we teach it and the way it comes across, because as we've learned over years, everybody learns in different ways, and there's different ways to engage students. But sticking to this idea of content, it's an interesting discussion, because there are some people that say, again, I want to learn something that directly ties into what I'm going to do in life. And so you want something to be more specific. And prior to that, obviously, when you're a younger child, we want you to have the basic skills. And I think as you get younger and younger in the education system, there's more agreement on what should be learned. It's when you go up towards the high school area, that's when a lot of debate happens. So going back to the purpose of education, it's twofold for the most part. And a lot of people don't really realize this, but the purpose of education in America, as it were, obviously was to prepare people to be able to do certain tasks. As far as farmers, that's what we were. We were a farming nation, and it was to help prepare the workers with only the things that they needed to, fulfill their job and their task. But by and large, getting to high school, that was reserved for the higher up people, because it was either you're a worker and you're learning the basic things that you need to know to be a worker, or you were somebody that was going to become a politician or someone in church. And those are the children that were able to go on to what we considered higher education back then, was high school. And so preparing the next leaders is basically what it was. But the second thing that education was there for was to prepare citizens for democracy. And so as you get into America as an independent country and all that, what you got to realize is that they wanted people who were informed enough that they can look at politicians and they can see what they were talking about, and they can look at the issues of today, and they understood the system well enough where they could use their voice as citizens, and they could make the right vote for their politicians to represent them. Now, funny enough, as we're sitting here in Corona times, I think you got to think about that. Think about that now. I would hope, I know it's not going to happen, but I would hope some people get awoken. I don't even know if that's a word. I would hope some people wake up to what's going on and really start asking the questions, because when it's business as usual, a lot of stuff gets done behind the scenes by our government, and we don't really question or think about it. And then, of course, we have our current president at last election and a lot of apathy of I'm not going to vote and whatever. And we see how that could really change results. And so hopefully, for good or bad, during these times of crisis and pandemic, we start to really realize the power of government. We start to hopefully realize what they're here to do and what their job and responsibility really is to us as citizens. They have so much money that comes from us, and they have positions that because we voted them there. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize what their needs are, what the government can actually do, and hopefully how to exercise their power. And so you got to think nowadays, whether it's you, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whoever, how many people are you around that actually know the political system, and that they actually understand how to exercise their power and when to exercise it, not just get to a voting poll and vote, but how many do they actually know? I mean, we have president, vice president, all that, but I'm talking about more than that, more than senator, more than governor. How many people understand what the mayor does? How many understand what the comptroller does? How many people understand what the governor and his board does? And I could tell you now, I was never big into the political system, and by way of what I do now, I have to be, and I'm starting to be fine with that. But before, I was never really into it, and so I still don't. There's a lot that I'm always constantly learning. But a lot of us grew up that way. It's not something that we talk about, being engaged citizens. You talk about the Constitution twice and, your K through 12 education, and you got to pass the test. And that's about it. And so obviously some school districts and schools do a better job. But for the most part, our reasoning for going to school is not any longer about creating engaged citizens. We lost that a long time ago, and that used to be a big priority. It was to create a country of citizens who understand how to run democracy. And obviously now we have so much corruption over many centuries, corruption and manipulation, because you have people that want to keep citizens ignorant to how things work, and so they can take advantage of them. And so we lost that. And there's probably another conversation about how valuable that is and what we should be teaching in schools to get students ready to hold the government accountable. All right, so let's fast forward to now. What happened was, well, let's just say this. So now we have a lot of people that talk about they want to be taught things that directly goes into what they're going to do. If you think about college, for those that have completed a college degree or got to senior level courses, most students will tell you that the college experience is different once you're in major classes. You know, once you're past general education and you're taking only classes related to your major. Most people tell you the experience is different. I would say majority of people like it a lot more, because now you're saying, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm interested in. And now I'm taking classes that are just about this topic. And so it might be easier for you to do well. You might be more engaged in class. Homework doesn't feel like a burden as much, all that good stuff. And so there's a reason for that, because you are engaged with the material. And so a lot of people feel like, well, that's what we need to trickle down to the K through 12 side, is being engaged with something specific. And so we have vocational schools. We have some systems where students early on are able to focus on a certain career path. And so that came about when we had the Industrial Revolution, when we had people building businesses and factories and all that, and realizing we need more workers. We need skilled workers. And so obviously people with money influence the policy. And so they say, we will put money into the schools and into education, but we want them to start teaching things that will directly make them better workers when they come out. And so you can still see that today. You see how much free money comes in these STEM programs. And, you know, right now, air and space is becoming a big thing as well. And you see even, you know, engineering is part of STEM, but you see certain career choices being really pushed to minority groups, being pushed to younger children. And that's where we have a lack of workforce. And so it's an investment by these companies to put that free money into the education system so that they can attract and hopefully build a stronger workforce of people coming through. And so there's definitely a discussion to be had about if that's right or wrong. But when people are talking about learning specific education for a specific job, that's what we're talking about. So as we get a shortage of nurses and teachers, you'll see more money being put into early programs to push students towards that career. Even if you think about a union, say a local union of welders, if they went to their local school district and gave them a big check and said, we want to start getting, you know, fourth graders around this and letting them know what it is and show them this and letting them know the career path, that's because they're investing in having more welders down the line. And so the money influences the education, and some people think that's good, some people don't think so. And so that is the question of, is that what we should be doing? Is that what education should do? Is that what we should learn in class? Is how to become career focused. And so one of the things that you kind of lose with that, which we have lost, because currently we're partly focused in a workforce. And then I'll talk about the next thing after this, but that's partially what we do. What we no longer do is, as I said, get students ready to be citizens of democracy. And so the problem with industry coming into education is you lose that. It's no longer about the greater good. It's just about the economy. Now, the other part that our current education system is tied up in is what we mostly know, and that's our own personal gain, as they call it, social mobility. And so that's just you trying to get as high up as you can and using education to do that. So obviously, if someone, and we see it a lot now, especially if someone feels I can make a lot of money or I can get to where I want to go without a college degree, then they won't go to college. And so one of the big things is social media and YouTubers that has pushed that narrative. But even for someone that wants to be an engineer or a doctor, if they didn't have to go to medical school, do you think they would do it? And so, and not to say that everybody that does that is only doing it for a certain thing, but you are doing it for your personal gain. You are trying to reach a certain place, and you're jumping through the hoops. And one of the big problems with this, and I've seen it firsthand, is it becomes about completion. It's not about learning. And so if you ever heard the pump and dump society, you ever heard people talk about, cramming information before tests, taking the test and then forgetting about it. Y equals mx plus b. A lot of people might not even remember a lot of that. Now, I've had to work around students in high school, a lot with algebra and all that basic math stuff. So I still remember it. But for a lot of people that have never had to be around education since they graduated, they might not remember that. And there's a reason, because we're just trying to complete the task. We're just trying to do what we can to get the A, or we're trying to do what we can to pass the test, or whatever it might be. And so now education becomes an exercise of you jumping through hoops to get to where you want to go. And that, I would say, is probably 70% of our education. And the other 30% is pushing in people to the workforce. And obviously the big issue with that is that people aren't learning. And so when we're talking about what should be taught in class, and what we should be learning in school, that becomes the biggest problem right now, is that we're not learning anything. And so you have students that are high achievers that do take away some transferable skills. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But for the most part, they're not learning any content. They're not they're not building a knowledge base. All they're doing is learning how to persist. And persist works, because that's what we look at when you talk about big districts that receive money and, are held accountable from the government. They're looking at graduation rates. They're looking, at pass rates. They're looking at standardized test scores. When you're shopping for colleges, because it is a shopping thing now, people are looking at graduation rates, retention rates, job placement rates. It's about completion. That's what people are looking at. They're not really digging into the learning. They're not really investigating if someone's learning something. And so that becomes a big issue, obviously, on the lower end, and we're not even talking about the students that aren't trying or don't care, but you do lose them because they are disengaged. They're not interested in running a rat race or jumping through hoops until later on. And unfortunately, I saw a lot of that as an educator on the K through 12 side in high schools, where you have students that think like, I don't care. Like, I'm not jumping through hoops because I'm not looking to do any of that. I'm not looking for those type of positions. I'm not trying to get to that point in life, like all these other people. I got my own plans. And then 3, 4, 5 years down the line, they're coming back shaking their head like, man, I messed up. I really want to do XYZ right now, but I didn't get my high school diploma. Now I got to get my GED. Or I got my high school diploma, but my GPA was so low, I'm not able to get into this program, or whatever it might be. And so now they're screwed on the back end. And so all three of these, I think, work together. But right now, as America, we only look at two. We only look at what can education do for me to get to the position I want, And we're also only looking at what type of education can get me into a certain career. And the industry is only looking at what type of education is going to produce certain type of workers. And or the other one I forgot about is IT, coding, all that right now. And it sounds great because everybody's just like, yeah, good paying jobs. And they're having all these free camps and they're showing options to students, which I agree. I 100% agree. I'm not saying it's all negative, but there are, negative consequences attached to it as well. So that's what I think we're wrapped up in. So then the question becomes, well, what is it that we think we should be learning? Or what is it that Terry thinks we should be learning? What is it that schools are meant for? What does it mean going to school right now, K through 12? What does it mean going to, going through college and getting a degree? What should that mean for you? And I do think it's different at different levels. As I said, as you continue to go up the ladder, it becomes more of a debate. But overall, what I think is, and through my journey of education and looking at it, I think we should be aiming to create self-thinkers. And what I mean by that is our job is to help students build their own ability to decipher, to freely and creatively think, and to have higher order skills, as they say. So the higher order skills are problem solving, critical thinking, creativity. All these different areas are what we would consider high order skills and transferable skills. So for most of us that have worked multiple jobs, we know that there's certain things that are specific to the job, but there's other skills that you build up that you can take to any job. Like, yes, I was working in a hotel here as a manager, but now I'm working, wherever at a corporate place doing events. Like, it's not the same, but there's a lot of different skills you can transfer and say, okay, I can pull from that information and reuse it over here to do something new. And that's really the essence of what education should be doing. And so, as I mentioned earlier, you have high achieving students who might not be building a content base, but they are learning perseverance. They are learning how to quickly digest information, disseminate it so that they can go and take a test, but is not framed in the right way. And some of those skills help, but it's not framed in the right way. So we have to get to a point where we show a connection through our education. And so it doesn't matter if I'm in history class, I'm in math class, it doesn't matter if I'm in English class, doesn't matter if I'm in art, gym, whatever. We have to get to a point where we have a connected map of skills that we're trying to get students to learn. Some people might call them learning outcomes or whatever. And really it's just to say that I'm building up my skills in problem solving, or my problem solving skills. I'm building up my capacity and critical thinking, whatever it is. And so once we start getting to a point where we let these outcomes be named, because that's the biggest thing. It has to be named. It can't be in secret. It can't, because we sit here now as adults like, what was I doing in that class? And if you haven't reflected on it, you don't really know what you took away from that class. But if you name it for the students and it's connected throughout their whole curriculum and ideally throughout our whole American education, we could say, I'm building up these XYZ skills. And so if I'm working on Y equals MX plus B, and it's like, well, how come I'm learning this? I'm not going to be using slopes in the type of jobs or the work that I want to do. And then you could talk to a student how these problem solving skills how you can use this to decipher this equation and figure this out, how that translates to you critically thinking in another situation. And as you can, so if we say this assignment or this particular thing is working on these skills, and then you go to English class and you say this assignment is working on these skills, and you're like, I just worked on those skills in math class. How is this assignment related to that assignment? You start making more connections and you start to reflect more, because now kids, students don't reflect on anything. They just go home. It's like, yeah, school is over. But the more you start thinking about your learning, as they call it, meta learning, and you start thinking about how you learn and what you learn, then you start to remember it more and you start to make concrete connections. And so at the end of the day, when you're through the education system, and if you choose to go to college or not, you should at the very least be able to understand your higher order skills. So if you're going into something that might be a trade or certificate, or you're going into something that just doesn't require you to have a degree or anything but a high school diploma, maybe you're going to be an entrepreneur or you're going to do something online or whatever, you still understand what type of skills you gained through that education, as far as how you think about things, how you approach a problem, how do you critically think through scenarios, all these different things. You had opportunity to express your creativity. And one of the biggest things is how to reuse information. That's one of the highest orders, I think, of learning, is being able, and I think a lot of us do it, we don't think about it though, being able to take information from one context and one setting, one scenario, one situation, and apply it to something completely different. And it's hard for a lot of people, but I think we do it more than we actually realize. And so I think all those things is what education should be for. On top of that, that does go into the citizen part, because there is a lot of, I think, like, high quality institutions of education on the high school level and the college level that really, really push your ability to understand studies and research. You see it a lot with liberal arts as well. And some people say, well, why? And even me to recently, I'm just like, well, why do you need to understand research? I'm not going to be a scientist, or I'm not going to research something. Why do I need to understand research? The reason you need to understand research is because right now, COVID-19, Corona, you go on the internet and you can read an article and it could say, anything. It could say chocolate gives you Corona. And if you have no depth or concept of how to figure out if information is true or not, then you can be susceptible and ignorant, and, you can be taken advantage of by the government. And so it becomes very important. And I think with the internet age, students are better at this because they're used to seeing spam and having to figure out if it's spam or not and all this, and seeing if it's valid. But really understanding research, because at times it's like, whatever, research. But research pushes everything. And so everything we know about Corona coming out is coming from research. When people make decisions, or they tell you things like the unemployment rate in regular times, or they tell you how well the economy is doing, or they tell you the keto diet is now the popular thing, that all comes out of research. And so our ability to understand, you don't have to do research, but you got to be able to understand what it is. So you know what to look for. If someone says to you, okay, if you eat this certain fruit, you'll learn how to fly. We've done a huge research study. It's true. And they give you the research and you don't know what it is. And you're just like, okay, they got authority. They got, they're a position of authority. So it might be true. Obviously, we have people that are skeptical and be like, I don't care if you're a researcher, I don't trust you. But there's still that huge chunk of people that's like, okay, I don't know. I can't argue against you because I don't know if, you did this correctly. But if you understand the mechanics of a research and structure, you can then go look and ask the right questions. You can then look through the research and look for the right parts to say, okay, this is a research that I don't feel is very valid, or that I don't feel was done correctly. And so as they continue to do everything, they tell you what products are good for babies. They tell you again what products is good for your health. They tell you about smoking and marijuana and all. I mean, I don't smoke, but one of the biggest things that I've learned recently is this whole idea that marijuana became so stigmatized because of a political move. And they literally made up scientific research and facts about it to demonize it. And it was for somebody's political campaign. And people just accepted it. And that was a long, long, long time ago. But that wouldn't be any different right now. I mean, if when vaping was really big, when it first came out, and somebody came out with a research and tell you how great vaping was, people just like, yeah, man. And they just repeat the facts. Like, yeah, 2 out of 3 people say, but you don't actually look into the research. And so it's really the ability to discern information and to recreate information. At the end of the day, that's the 2 things. It's a long process, but that's the 2 things you should be able to come out of high school with. We should have students that know how to discern information. You give them something and they can critically think, does this make sense? Is this right? And at least even if it might not be right, if they think it's right, they know how to back up their opinion. And then recreating information. They know how to take experiences from one place and transfer that information and skills to a experience in a new place. Those are the 2 things I think we should come out of American education with on a K through 12 level. So anyway, I spoke a lot, and this is a series. So I will be talking about other aspects of American education soon. But as far as this whole discussion, I think it starts with the content. It starts with what we're learning in class, why we're learning it, and what we should be learning. So anyway, if you got comments, go to comment section. I appreciate it. Like to have that discussion. Share it around with other people. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and until next episode.